Okay, so we have our 2 trim pieces sewn onto our piece. So this finishes the edge of our pillowcase or the top of our pillowcase. So now we are ready to actually seam our pillowcase together down the sides and the bottom to make the pillowcase. But before we can do that, if your fabrics did not line up straight, then what you want to do is you want to trim those so that we get a straight line with the edge of our big piece of fabric to make our pillowcase. Okay, so I took a straight edge, drew a line, and now I'm just going to cut those off to make it a straight edge. Okay, and my other side was already straight. Okay, now to sew the sides and the bottom of our pillowcase, we're actually going to do a French seam. So if you remember with a French seam, we start by putting wrong sides together. So we're going to lay our pillowcase, fold it in half, wrong sides together, matching up the edges, which are the selvages of our fabric. Okay. And we're going to match up the bottom of our pillowcase. And we want to pin those so that they stay in place. Right here, we want to make sure that as we are matching this up, that the top of our pillowcase is even. But we also want to make sure that our seams on both sides are the same where we sewed our top piece on and where our bottom trim is coming, so that when we sew that seam, it's going to make a continuous loop of the fabric. So we have that pinned, and now we're ready to sew. Okay, so we're ready to sew down the side and the bottom of our pillowcase. Remember, we're doing a French seam. So when we do a French seam, our first row of stitching is at 1/4 of an inch, which is the edge of the presser foot. So we're going to line up the edge of the fabric with the edge of the presser foot. We're going to back stitch. And then we're going to stitch down the side. Keeping the edge of our fabric at the edge of our presser foot. Okay, as we come to the corner, we want to stop our stitch, and you can use your hand wheel to get it there, about 1/4 of an inch from the bottom. We want to lead our needle down, and we're going to lift up our presser foot, and we're going to pivot so that we have a continuous seam, but we're going to turn the corner. We're going to put our presser foot down, and we're going to start stitching again with the fabric aligned at the edge of the presser foot for a 1/4 inch seam allowance. We're going to sew across the bottom of our pillowcase. And when we get to the folded edge, We're going to sew to the edge, and then we're going to back stitch. Okay, since we're going to do a French seam, and this is going to go into the inside of our seam, we don't want any of these loose threads to be hanging out because they'll come out on the right side of the fabric. So we just want to make sure we trim any loose threads that we have off across our fabric. All right, when we get to the corner, we want to cut the corner between the stitching and the edge at a diagonal. What this is going to allow us to do is we flip that corner and flip the fabric right side in. This is going to allow us to eliminate some of the bulk here in the corner when we flip that. All right, so we're ready to turn the pillowcase right sides in, so wrong sides out. And we want to make sure that we get our corners nice and smooth, so punch those out. So that you get nice sharp corners. Okay. All right, now what we want to do is we want to iron this flat, and then we're going to iron it like this so that this becomes our fold. So we have our pillowcase wrong side out. This is our original seam. So we're going to iron that so that it's nice and flat. As we come to the corner, you're just going to kind of have to work it the best you can to get it flat there. Okay. We're going to do the same thing across the bottom. And now we're going to take those seams and make them into our folds. Okay. So we want to fold along that seam that we just pressed. Press the bottom. And down the side of our pillowcase. All right, then you can put some pins in there to hold it in place while we stitch. Okay, so now we're ready to sew the second seam to make our French seam. So this time it's at 3/8 of an inch, or because this doesn't have to be real accurate, if you want to, you can move it over to 1/2 inch to make sure that you get your first seam enclosed in your next seam. So again, we're going to back stitch, and then we're going to sew down. As we get to the bottom, we want to leave our 3/8 to our 1/2 inch, depending on what you sewed at. We're going to leave the needle down. We're going to pivot, put the presser foot back down, and continue to sew. When you get to the edge, back stitch, and take it out and cut your threads. Okay, so we're finished sewing our pillowcase, so now we're ready to turn it right side out. And again, at the bottom, we just want to make sure that we actually push and get nice points in our corners. And you have your pillowcase. Over on the side seam, you should have where these match up where you've sewn them through the side seam. So you should have a straight line across where your pieces join.